480 Marines were pinned down in a valley of death. High Command ordered the Overwatch team to fall back. Protocol dictated they leave the battalion to its fate. But Chief Sarah Jenkins, the first female SEAL sniper, killed her radio, chambered around, and went to work. The Zardash Valley is a jagged scar carved into the earth, a maze of limestone cliffs and crumbling terraced villages that has swallowed armies whole. For the 480 men of the 3rd Battalion 5th Marines, it was supposed to be a standard sweep and clear operation. Intel suggested a sprawling network of weapons caches hidden in the caves dotting the valley floor. It was a Tuesday in late October. The air was thin, biting cold, and completely dead. High above the valley floor, cloaked in a hide site built into the sheer rock face, lay Chief Petty Officer Sarah Jenkins. Jenkins wasn't just a sniper, she was an anomaly. After the grueling physical and psychological hell of Bades, she had quietly become the first female operator to earn the Trident, attached to a specialized reconnaissance element. Her presence in the valley was highly classified. She and her spotter, Petty Officer First Class Ryan O'Connor, were not there to babysit the Marines. They were on a separate, Tier 1 directive, observe a high-value transit route, and wait for a ghost regional warlord, known only as the Architect, to pass through. Through the optics of her MiG-13 sniper rifle, Jenkins watched the Marines advance. Captain David Miller led Alpha Company right up the center of the dry riverbed. His men staggered in a textbook tactical column. To their flanks, Bravo and Charlie companies climbed the low ridges, boots crunching softly against shale. From Jenkins's vantage point, 1,200 yards up and 2 miles away, they looked like ants marching into a funnel. Something felt wrong. The hairs on the back of Jenkins' neck stood up beneath her shemagh. "O'Connor," she whispered, her eye glued to the scope. "Look at the village on the northern ridge, Sector 4. Beside her, O'Connor shifted slightly behind his spotting scope. "I see it. No heat signatures. No livestock. Usually you see stray dogs or goats. It's completely sterile. It's a funnel," Jenkins murmured. Before she could key her radio to warn the Marine commander, the valley erupted. It didn't start with a single shot, but with a synchronized, deafening roar. From 3 sides of the steep cliffs, the mountainside literally blew open. Camouflaged spider holes and false rock walls dropped away to reveal heavy DHK anti-aircraft guns. The enemy had dragged 12.7mm machine guns up paths a goat would struggle to climb. Tracer fire, glowing a sickening green, poured down into the riverbed. The first volley was devastating. It tore through the Marine vanguard, instantly severing the command elements of Bravo Company. Mortars began raining down with terrifying precision, not randomly, but pre-registered on the exact boulders and depressions the Marines would naturally dive behind for cover. This wasn't a weapons cache sweep, it was a baited trap. Down in the dirt, the radio net exploded into chaotic screaming. "Contact front, contact left. We have mass casualties. Any station on this net, this is Alpha Actual, we are pinned down in a complex L-shaped ambush. We need immediate close air support." Jenkins swept her scope across the carnage. She watched a young Marine Private Tommy Hayes, his name stenciled on his pack, trying desperately to drag a bleeding squadmate behind the hollowed-out husk of an old Soviet tank. Dust and rock chips sprayed over Hayes as bullets chewed the ground inches from his face. Jenkins' finger instinctively hovered over her trigger. "O'Connor, give me wind on the heavy gunner, elevation 800. Ah! Suddenly a voice crackled sharply in their earpieces, cold and authoritative. It was Commander Harrison Reed, the Joint Task Force commander running the shadow operation from a TOC hundreds of miles away in Bagram. "Wraith 20, this is Overlord. Do you have eyes on the Marine element?" "Affirmative, Overlord," Jenkins replied, her voice tight. They walked into a pre-planned kill zone, battalion strength enemy force. "They are being slaughtered down there, requesting permission to engage and provide overwatch." There was a heavy pause on the line. The drone feeds in the TOC must have been showing the massacre in horrific high-definition infrared. But Reed's calculus was cold, driven by the broader strategic picture. If Jenkins and O'Connor fired, their muzzle flashes would compromise the hide site. The Architect was inbound within the next 24 hours. If that target was spooked, he would vanish, taking the locations of highly organized terror cells with him. Negative, Wraith 2-0, Reed commanded. Hold your fire. Maintain absolute concealment. Close air support is grounded due to a severe sandstorm moving in from the east. Fast movers can't get in. QRF is 2 hours out. You are to remain dark. Do not compromise the primary objective. Acknowledge. Jenkins stared through her glass. A mortar round slammed into a cluster of Marines near the riverbank. Through the magnification, she could see the shock waves rippling through the dust, bodies thrown like ragdolls. Overlord, if we don't intervene, 3-5 is going to be wiped out. They are trapped in a defilade. The enemy has the high ground and is walking artillery right down their throats. I repeat, negative, Wraith. That is a direct order. The Marines will hold their own. You will not break protocol. If you fire, you face a general court-martial. Do you copy? O'Connor looked at Jenkins, his face pale under his face paint. He was a seasoned operator, a man who followed the rules because the rules kept SEALs alive. Sarah, he whispered. He's right. The mission. If we shoot, we blow the OP. We have to sit this out. Down in the valley, Captain Miller's voice came over the emergency guard channel, stripped of all tactical composure. We are combat ineffective. We are taking fire from all elevations. Where is our air? If we don't get suppressive fire up here now, we're all going to die in this ditch. Jenkins closed her eyes. The sniper's mantra is control. Control your breathing. Control your heartbeat. Control your emotions. You are a machine calculating distance, gravity, spindrift, and wind. You do not feel, you execute. But the screams coming through the radio were human. She opened her eyes and looked through the glass again. Private Hayes was crying. She couldn't hear him, but she could see the way his chest heaved, his face smeared with dirt and his squad mate's blood. He had stopped firing his M4. He was just hunkering down, waiting for the inevitable heavy-caliber round that would tear through the rusted Soviet armor and end his life. The DHK gunner on the eastern ridge was slowly panning his weapon toward Hayes' position, systematically obliterating every piece of cover in his path. Protocol. The word echoed in her mind. Protocol meant watching 480 men die so they could maybe shoot one terrorist tomorrow. Protocol meant abandoning Americans to burn in a foreign valley. Jenkins reached up to the side of her helmet. Sarah, don't do it, O'Connor pleaded, seeing her hand move. Reed will end your career. You'll go to Leavenworth. You're the first woman to make it here. They will make an example out of you. They'll say you broke under pressure. They're going to die, Ryan, she said, her voice dropping to a dead, icy calm. It's not our fight. They wear our flag, she snapped back. That makes it our fight. With a swift, deliberate motion, Jenkins gripped the communication wire connecting her headset to the encrypted satellite radio. She yanked it. The comms link severed with a sharp crackle of static, plunging her headset into silence. She was completely cut off from command, gone rogue. You can leave, Ryan, Jenkins said, settling her cheek against the stock of the Mk-13. Climb down the back side of the ridge. Tell them I pulled rank and forced you out. Save your trident. O'Connor stared at the disconnected wire, then down at the valley. He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. He slowly reached up, pulled his own comms wire, and let it drop to the dirt. Wind is blowing left to right 4 miles per hour, O'Connor said, pressing his eye back to his spotting scope. Target the DHK gunner on the eastern ridge. Distance is 1,420 yards. Dial up 12.5 MOA. A tight, fierce smile crossed Jenkins' face. Send it. She adjusted her turrets. The math flowed through her head like water. At 1,420 yards, it would take her .300 Winchester Magnum bullet nearly 2 seconds to reach the target. She had to account for the rotation of the Earth, the drop in temperature, the shifting thermals rising off the hot sand below. She exhaled, held it at the natural respiratory pause. The crosshairs rested not on the gunner, but slightly above and to the left, anticipating the bullet's arc. A finger squeezed the 3-pound trigger. Crack. The heavy rifle kicked against her shoulder. A cloud of suppressed dust kicked up around their hide sight. Through the scope, time seemed to slow down. Down in the valley, the DSK gunner had his finger on the spade grips, lining up the rusted tank where Private Hayes was hiding. Just as he squeezed his own trigger, his head snapped violently backward. A pink mist vaporized in the thin mountain air, and his body slumped over the heavy weapon, dead before the sound of the gunshot even reached the valley. The heavy machine gun fell silent. For 3 seconds, nobody understood what had happened. Captain Miller, pinned behind a rock, looked up in confusion as the relentless suppressing fire suddenly halted. "Target down," O'Connor whispered. "Shift left." 2 mortar tubes, elevation 900, distance 1250. Jenkins smoothly worked the bolt, ejecting the smoking brass casing and chambering a fresh round. Got them. Crack. A second insurgent, holding a mortar shell over a tube, crumpled to the ground, dropping the live explosive onto the rocky ledge. The resulting explosion took out the entire mortar team, sending a plume of black smoke into the air. Crack, crack. Jenkins fell into a deadly rhythm. She wasn't just shooting, she was conducting a symphony of violence from the clouds. She targeted the leadership first men waving their arms, shouting orders, pointing toward the Marines' positions. Without their commanders, the insurgent attack lost its coordination. Then she targeted the RPG gunners. Down in the kill zone, the Marines began to realize they had a guardian angel. For actual, this is Bravo 2. The enemy heavy guns on the East Ridge are going down. I repeat, the heavy guns are down. Someone is engaging from the high ground. Captain Miller didn't care who it was or where they came from. He recognized the shift in momentum. The psychological weight of the ambush was lifting. "All units, this is Alpha Actual. Suppress the lower ridges. Push up the flanks while they're disorganized. Move, move, move." The 3 Atake Marines, realizing they were no longer fish in a barrel, roared back to life. Their M240 machine guns began laying down a base of fire, their M203 grenade launchers thumping rhythmically. Up on the ridge, the barrel of Jenkins' rifle was burning hot. She had dropped 14 targets in less than 6 minutes. The insurgent force, previously focused entirely on the slaughter below, suddenly realized they were being hunted. Panic spread through their ranks. They couldn't see the sniper. The suppressed shots echoed confusingly off the canyon walls, masking Jenkins' true location. But the enemy wasn't amateur. The Warlord's fighters included seasoned Chechen and Syrian veterans. They knew how to triangulate. "Sarah," O'Connor said, his voice dropping an octave. "We have a problem. They've stopped shooting at the Marines. They're looking for us." Jenkins peered through the scope. Below, heavily armed fighters were turning their optics and binoculars toward the limestone cliffs. "Look at the southern peak," O'Connor said urgently. Glint. Jenkins swung her rifle high on a jagged outcropping, nearly parallel to their position. She saw it. The unmistakable reflection of the sun off a glass scope. It was an enemy counter-sniper team, and they had just spotted the heat distortion rising from Jenkins' hot barrel. "They see us," she said. Before she could adjust her aim, the rock face 6 inches from her head exploded. The supersonic crack of the enemy sniper's round echoed a fraction of a second after the bullet shattered the limestone inches from Jenkins' face. Razor-sharp fragments of rock exploded outward like shrapnel. A jagged piece sliced across Jenkins's right cheekbone, drawing a sudden hot line of blood that pulled dangerously close to her shooting eye. She didn't flinch. She didn't wipe the blood. "Sniper! Sniper! Southern Ridge, elevation 1200. O'Connor barked, pressing himself flat against the rocky floor of the hide site. "He's got us zeroed, Sarah. If we move, we're dead." Jenkins kept her eye welded to the optic, blinking rapidly to keep her vision clear. The enemy shooter was good. He had waited for her muzzle flash, utilizing the chaos of the valley below to mask his own positioning. "I don't need to move," Jenkins whispered, her voice deadened to a low rhythmic drone. "I just need his flash. Give me the wind shift on the southern peak." "Thermals are rising," O'Connor said, his hands moving blindly to adjust the dials on his spotting scope without exposing his head. "Wind is swirling. Call it full value, right to left 6 miles per hour. Distance is 1,100 yards. The angle is steep, subtract 2 mower for the incline. Down in the valley, Captain David Miller realized the terrifying, coordinated machine gun fire that had pinned Alpha Company down had inexplicably stopped. The enemy was retreating into the higher cave networks, their focus entirely shifted upward toward the northern cliffs. Private Tommy Hayes, still clutching his M4 behind the rusted Soviet tank, looked up at the towering ridges. "Captain," Hayes yelled over the din of scattered small arms fire. "They aren't shooting at us anymore. They're climbing. They're going after whoever saved us." Miller pulled his binoculars and scanned the cliffs. He saw dozens of insurgents, scrambling up goat paths and ascending fixed ropes with terrifying speed, converging on a single high-altitude point. "They're flushing out our overwatch," Miller snarled. He keyed his radio, switching from the dead command net to the local company frequency. "Alpha and Bravo companies, listen up. We have a guardian angel up on that ridge, and they are about to get overrun. Fix bayonets. Check ammo. We are taking the mountain." Back in the hide site, Jenkins slowed her breathing to a near stop. The blood from her cheek dripped onto the stock of her MK-13. She stared intently at the jagged outcropping where she had seen the glint. The enemy sniper made a fatal error. He grew impatient. Assuming he had wounded or killed the American shooter with his first shot, he shifted his rifle slightly, preparing to scan for O'Connor. That micro-movement was all Jenkins needed. She caught the subtle shift of shadow behind a narrow fissure in the rocks. "Got him," she murmured. She didn't wait for the natural respiratory pause. She forced it. She applied 3 pounds of pressure to the trigger. Crack. A 1300 Win Mag round tore across the valley, cutting through the swirling mountain thermals. It struck the narrow rock fissure dead center, precisely where the enemy scope had been resting. A faint puff of dust and debris erupted from the gap, followed by the sight of a rifle barrel sliding limply forward over the ledge. "Target neutralized," O'Connor breathed out, a heavy sigh of relief washing over him. But the relief lasted only a second. An RPG warhead screamed through the air and slammed into the rock face directly below their hide site. The concussive wave threw Jenkins backward, her rifle clattering against the limestone. Dust and smoke filled the narrow crevice. "They're coming up the ropes," O'Connor yelled, grabbing his M4 carbine and moving to the edge of the overlook. "We have multiple footmobiles pushing our position." 30 meters out and closing fast, Jenkins grabbed her personal defense weapon, a compact MPEP-7 submachine gun, from her pack. A sniper rifle was useless at this range. She had traded the cold, calculated distance of a sniper for the bloody, chaotic intimacy of close-quarters combat. "Defend the choke point," Jenkins ordered, sliding behind a boulder near the entrance of their hide site. The first insurgent crested the ridge, an AK-47 raised. O'Connor dropped him with a short, controlled burst to the chest. But 2 more immediately took his place. The narrow mountain path became a fatal funnel, but the sheer volume of enemy fighters threatened to overwhelm the 2 isolated SEALs. Gunfire chewed the rocks around them. Jenkins leaned out, firing precise bursts from her MP7, sending 2 fighters tumbling backward off the cliff face. But they were running out of ammunition, and they had no radio to call for an exfil. They were completely, utterly alone. Then Jenkins saw him. Through the swirling smoke and the chaos of the firefight, a man stood further down the mountain path, directing the assault. He wasn't dressed in the standard tactical gear or rags of the insurgents. He wore an immaculate olive-drab field jacket and a distinctive crimson shimmer. He was screaming orders, pointing toward Jenkins' position with an ornate, gold-inlaid Makarov pistol. Jenkins' heart stopped. She had stared at his dossier picture for 6 months. It was the architect. The intel had been wrong. The architect wasn't just passing through the Zardash Valley. He had orchestrated the ambush himself. He was the bait, and the 3-5 Marines were the prize. High Command had wanted Jenkins to wait for a ghost, not realizing the ghost was the one pulling the trigger on 480 American troops. "Ryan," Jenkins shouted over the deafening rattle of automatic fire. "The HVT, the architect, is on the ridge." O'Connor dropped an empty magazine and slammed a fresh one into his M4. Sarah, we are out of time. I have maybe 60 rounds left. A stray bullet caught O'Connor in the left thigh. He grunted, stumbling backward and falling hard against the cavern wall. Blood immediately began soaking through his desert camis. I'm hit, he gasped, clamping a hand over his leg to stem the bleeding. Jenkins dragged him further back into the shadows of the cave. She was out of MP7 magazines. She looked down at her Make-13 sniper rifle, lying in the dirt where she had dropped it. It was a bolt-action rifle designed for precision at a mile away, not for holding off an infantry assault at 20 yards. She picked it up anyway. She had 3 rounds left in the magazine. Jenkins low-crawled to the edge of the hide site. The insurgents were advancing cautiously now, sensing the Americans were wounded and low on ammo. The architect stood behind a cluster of boulders 30 yards away, confident his men were about to secure the prize of dead American special operators. Jenkins rested the heavy barrel of the Mk-13 on a rock. At 30 yards, the high-magnification scope was a liability. Everything was a blur. She couldn't use the optics. She had to point-shoot a heavy sniper rifle. She took a breath, ignoring the stinging pain in her cheek and the screaming of the insurgents outside. She peeked out, aiming down the side of the barrel, using the iron mechanics of the gun. The architect stepped out from behind his cover to yell a final command. Jenkins pulled the trigger. The massive 13-300 Win Mag round struck the architect square in the chest. At that short distance, the ballistic force was catastrophic. He was lifted off his feet and thrown violently backward, crashing over the edge of the cliff and disappearing into the abyss of the valley. The insurgents froze. They had just watched their untouchable warlord get obliterated. The psychological shock paralyzed them for exactly 3 seconds. That was all the Marines needed. A barrage of 40mm grenades from M-Tallery launchers rained down on the mountain path. Private Tommy Hayes was the first to crest the ridge, his face a mask of adrenaline and rage, his M4 blazing. Captain Miller and a squad of heavily armed, pissed-off Marines flooded the ledge, cutting down the remaining insurgents who were trapped in the open. The firefight ended as violently and suddenly as it had begun. The mountain fell deathly silent, save for the groans of the wounded and the ringing in Jenkins' ears. Captain Miller kicked a discarded AK-47 away and approached the hide site, his weapon at the low ready. He peered into the gloom of the cave, expecting to find a squad of Force Recon Marines or a heavily armed CIA paramilitary team. Instead, he saw a single female operator, her face covered in blood, dirt, and camouflage paint, kneeling beside a wounded SEAL, frantically applying a tourniquet to his leg. Miller lowered his rifle, stunned. Who are you? Jenkins pulled the tourniquet tight, securing the Velcro strap. She looked up at the Marine captain, her eyes burning with a fierce, exhausted light. Chief Jenkins, she said, a voice raspy. Naval Special Warfare. Private Hayes stepped up behind his captain, staring at the massive Mk-13 sniper rifle resting on the rocks. He looked at Jenkins, then down into the valley where the rusted Soviet tank lay, surrounded by mortar craters. You did that? Hayes asked, his voice cracking with emotion. You took out the heavy guns. I did, Jenkins replied flatly. Hayes' tears cutting clean lines through the dirt on his face, dropped to one knee beside her. You saved my life, Chief. You saved all of us. 2 days later, at the heavily fortified Joint Operations Center in Bagram, Chief Sarah Jenkins stood rigidly at attention. Her cheek was stitched and she wore a clean, pressed uniform. Across the steel desk sat Commander Harrison Reed. His face was a mask of cold fury. On the desk between them sat Jenkins' severed comms wire. He willfully disobeyed a direct order from a superior officer, Reed said softly, the silence in the room heavy and suffocating. You broke operational security. You compromised a Tier 1 hide site. Under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, I should have you court-martialed, stripped of your trident, and sent to Fort Leavenworth for the rest of your natural life. Jenkins stared straight ahead at the wall behind Reed. Yes, sir. Do you have anything to say for yourself, Chief? Jenkins lowered her gaze to meet Reed's eyes. 480 Marines came home, sir. I'd pull that wire again tomorrow. Reed's jaw muscle ticked. He slowly reached into a manila folder on his desk, and pulled out 2 documents. "This first paper," Reed said, tapping a red-stamped document, "is an official reprimand. It states you experienced an equipment failure and lost communications during a sandstorm. It officially grounds you from field operations for 6 months, pending a psychological evaluation." He slid the second paper forward. It was a casualty assessment report filed by Captain David Miller of the 3-5 Marines. Attached to it was a confirmed kill-in-action report for the warlord known as the Architect. "This second paper," Reed continued, his voice losing some of its edge, "is a classified commendation. It turns out the HVT you were sent to observe was personally leading the ambush. By breaking protocol, you not only saved a Marine battalion from total annihilation, but you decapitated the region's largest terror network." Reed leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "The official story is that you are a reckless operator who had a radio malfunction. The unofficial truth is that you are the deadliest sniper in this theater. The military needs heroes, Jenkins, but it also needs rules. You are a paradox, sir." "You're being transferred," Reed said, signing the transfer orders, "to a Black Element unit, where the rules you break won't end up on my desk." "Dismissed, Chief." Jenkins saluted sharply, turned on her heel, and walked out of the office. She was a ghost again. But down in the barracks of the 3-5 Marines, and in the memory of Private Tommy Hayes, she would forever be the phantom who rained hellfire from the heavens and refused to let them die. If you found this story of relentless courage and defiance against the odds inspiring, hit that like button and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more intense real-life battlefield stories and untold heroism from the front lines. Drop a comment below on what you think about Chief Jenkins' impossible choice. Your support keeps these stories alive.